Hello and welcome to the third live stream of the Eric Olin Wright Understanding Class Reading Group series. Today we have got a full panel. I'm just waiting for my YouTube version to go live and the sound to come on and then interrupt me and I won't know what the fuck is happening when I hear my own voice back through my headphones. So there we go. It's just done it. Okay, so we've got a pretty full panel here today. Let's bring him in from the bottom left with the ravishing hair. It's Tiberius Gracchus. Unmute yourself there, Tiberius, and how's it going?
As always, Tribunius Plebis Tiberius Victoria Publia Gracchus, they, them, if you please. How are you doing, Tom?
I am not too bad. That is like quite the hairstyle. It's like you were just out in a tornado. Not a tornado, it would be a more prevailing storm. Tornado kind of swirl, don't they? Did they swirl? They swirl macro level, but not micro level. I'm going to move swiftly onwards after that rubbish. Esri, how's it going?
Going great, Tom. I just discovered the beauty of a live resin vape cart, which has all kinds of wonderful extracts in it. Excellent. Big fan.
I'm glad to see I've like the last book we read together has brought back your addiction full on.
Oh, yeah. No, yeah. Well, you know, better than benzos. I don't want to end up like JP.
JP.
Yes.
Yes. Jordan Peterson, the god, the Marxist god.
That apple juice. Apple juice just takes down transphobes every time, I guess. It's the sulfates.
That's the sulfates, baby. Okay, on the top right, we have all the way from Wyoming. We've got Varna Pirian. Derek, Skep Post, how's it going?
I am okay.
That's Utah, by the way.
I'm in Utah. My ex-wife is from Wyoming.
Are they not the same? Is Wyoming not in Utah? It's not the capital of Utah?
Sure.
No. Thank you for saying that. Thank you. I feel bad as an American about geography sometimes, so just thank you for saying that.
I was being sarcastic.
Wyoming's got more elk than people, and that's a true fact. American
elk are what? Because European elk are deer, and in America, like an elk is like a moose. Is that right? No. In Europe, an elk is a moose, and a deer is like an elk in America.
Right.
Yeah.
Elk are subspecies of ungulate that look a lot like a deer, and moose will fucking kill you.
Have you guys seen the giant elk that used to be in Ireland like about 5,000 years ago?
I actually seen a skeleton of one of those reconstructed. Those things were huge.
They were fucking massive. There was one in my university in like one of the old buildings you walk in. There's two of them actually, and their antlers are like fucking like 10 foot wide. They are enormous. Like unbelievable. Yeah.
You had two of them in your university? What were the feeding budgets like?
They were massive, yeah. They used to eat a lot of red berries and the like. Okay, moving swiftly onwards out of this shit talk, we have all the way in Canada. Kyle, how's it going?
I'm still trying to get over the idea of an enormous elk that survives by just eating berries constantly. Just like how many berries did you have going on in Ireland at that time? Like it must have just been just like bounteous quantities for this elk to go around and hoover them up.
Let me get you a photo of this because it's truly fucking something.
Didn't there used to be lions in the British Isles like not that long ago?
I don't know the British Isles, no, but like the lions were in Europe up until like you'd have like lions in like the Roman amphitheater and stuff like that. That's because there was lions in Italy at the time. It was fucking, there was lions, I think, in like Serbia and places like that and Greece up until like within the last 150, 200 years. It's kind of wacky. But
holy shit.
Yeah, I'd have to check that up. I remember.
So is this elk like moose sized or like?
It's kind of moose sized. It's hard to get an impression here.
Okay.
Okay. All right, here's the one. Actually, this is the one in my university. Let's see if I can share the screen here.
All right. Okay.
Oh wait, no, that's the wrong one. Oh dear. What have I done? What have I done?
Got to rationalize your process, Tom.
Yeah, let's see here now. Add to stream.
Okay.
You see this one?
Holy
That's from my university.
shit!
Like they're
Holy
fucking
shit.
huge. Like the antlers.
Those are some antlers.
Some
That is-
Batman ass antlers is what they are.
Yeah, it's this one. Like,
That
look at
is
that. Look at that.
incredible.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Damn. Beautiful.
There we go.
Damn. That's like the birds of paradise of the ungulate world.
Yeah.
Right there.
The ungulate is a horrible word. Ungulate should not be a word. Let's just get that straight. Okay.
All right.
Let me see if I can just get the screen on the right one here, and then we can start in a second. Okay, so we've done chapter. Anybody else have anything to say? Oh, was there something else I wanted to say before we started? Oh yeah, like Arizona is the girl boss who voted no on the on the minimum wage. Is that your like senator or something, Esri?
What do I look like? A political scientist?
Yes.
I don't know.
Yes, it's your senator, and she used to be in the anti-war wing of the Green Party. She was a big leader of the progressive causes. That is Kirsten Sinema, one of the first LGBT people out LGBT people in the Senate. So,
very important distinction.
Yeah, that is a very important distinction, actually.
Yeah.
So it is both surprising and utterly not surprising, but this is not. We talk about politics all the time. Channel. I mean, it is, but different kind of politics.
Well, you see, that makes me feel so much better because it's like a part of me voted down the minimum wage. You know? Oh,
I mean,
thank
the
God.
parliamentarian took care of it for everybody anyway.
Yes. Yes.
Also,
And to them, we owe our agency.
And if we really wanted to be fair about like what was it would be the fight for 15 was actually from 12 years ago. So right. If you were to adjust for inflation, the 1962 minimum wage would be 24 point something dollars. So like
right.
So like
the pre-civil rights movement minimum wage, yeah,
that minimum wage, the 1962 minimum wage. So it was like $2, but inflation's a motherfucker.
Yeah, and you could buy a house for like 10.
Yeah.
The good old days.
I think my parents bought their house for £5,000.
I was about to say, yeah, I know some people who bought houses in the Valley of California for $10K in the 50s. Like,
which part of the valley? Like
Modesto, but still, like
okay.
it's worth almost $1 million now.
In Modesto.
Yes. Although they did have to go through and spend at one stage there was 21% interest rates on their mortgage, which is goddamn savage. So who knows what it'd be like. Okay. Let's hit it. We did chapter 1, so we're going to split chapter 2. We're going to split it in 2 because it's a very long chapter, and I haven't finished doing up all the slides yet, so that's our limiting factor here, apart from our ability to stay awake. Okay, so he's going to go in more. In the last one we had a look in the last section. He did kind of an overview of 3 kind of major areas. One was the kind of gradated kind of idea of class. Second was the opportunity hoarding view of Weber, and third was Marx's kind of exploitation/domination. And now he's going to do a kind of a deep dive into Weber and look at how exploitation is in the weeds in Weber, even if it's not very prominent. Okay, so let's have a look at these chapter objectives. This is lovely. This is like one of these really boring presentations I used to have to do in work. Okay, so
love it.
What's our objectives? We're going to understand the inner structure of Weber's concept of class, and I'm not sure who that was supposed to be.
What was that?
I'm not sure.
I got like a YouTube at like 2 a.m, kind of just like ranting at the screen about communist or something.
That's about right. And then also we have we're going to look at the similarities and differences between between this and Marx's concept of class. So we're going to kind of dig into the real difference there. And we're going to understand we're going to use this interrogation of Weber's work to defend the importance of the concept of exploitation for sociological theory. So he's kind of going to use Weber to defend exploitation. Okay. Everybody okay with those objectives before we move it on? Good.
I feel oriented.
Okay, good. I haven't looked at this now in about fucking 2 months, so I'm winging it here. Okay. So this is the central. So some of this we might actually go through quite fast because we've actually kind of done the last bit, so we're not still going through. So so the central concept of class is the problem of life chances in Weber. Okay, this idea of where where you're born, and the chances in life. Is he meaning more than just where you're born? Because that seems more like the gradated interpretation. What do people?
No, I'd say this kind of plugs into an existentialist or kind of like Rawlsian liberal, kind of like you don't really know where you're gonna end up, and the conditions that you're like put into greatly affects your life chances. This is probably like most radically expressed as like biopolitics, like who dies because of their sort of like the outcomes that their location in the structure of domination will puts upon them, essentially. Like, I don't know. Do people disagree with this here?
Is that biopolitics or is that necropolitics? Because
who lives in
isn't
who dies
biopolitics just about like the management of the population as a resource? Like you don't want to like you want to nurture and like manipulate the population in order to increase the power of the civilization or of the society.
Technically, you're right. This is necropolitics, but also like you can't do biopolitics without necropolitics. It's like a weeding mechanism, like of what you're encouraging versus it's like positive versus negative eugenics, essentially.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Makes a lot of sense.
So fair point. Also, I barely care about this in as much as it kind of like it forms maybe one of the more radical like Weberian points of view, biopolitics, necropolitics, like, and I would say that it's Weberian, like, pretty much.
What?
Have I made a mess of this already?
I don't know that like you've Foucault. Made a mess of it. I actually, I mean, Foucault's more Bardouian, and like, I don't want to, like, one of the things is I think like the three schemas, if we attach them to specific people, and then read those specific people into modern theory, it's misleading because you're like 5 chains removed when you're saying like Foucault is Weberian. Foucault might be, but he doesn't fucking know that. Like so.
Sure. Yeah, but I guess if we're talking about the mechanisms in a work, we're less concerned with how thinkers conceive themselves and more concerned with like how they explain things. So yeah, I accept that criticism basically.
All right.
Well, I just don't get the impression that biopolitics was like really what Weber was that interested in formulating this theory. Like, it's more about like just kind of understanding, well, how does this group of people operate in the world? What kind of mentality do they develop? And like, what are the sort of reciprocal relations between different groups that reproduce this way of life?
You're right about that. I'm bringing this up as the most radical expression of life chances, essentially. And the one that, I don't know, growing up, like just sort of hit me the hardest. Why do some people die for what seems like an existential dice roll? Why didn't they get a chance?
Right. It's not a this is not an equality of opportunity problematic. This is something more than that.
Yeah. Let us move on.
Yeah, I'm just going to say that, like, we should probably change this podcast, this series into like the positive eugenics podcast. What is that? What we're saying? Ezra, have I kind of spoken about it?
Is that what I'm saying? Is that what I'm saying, Tom? Is this the am I?
It's a joke. Just give it up. Okay, it's a joke. Let's move it on. Okay.
Jeez. Is this thing on? Hello?
What would Weber say about if the Irish are funny?
We know what was it? What did Freud say about the Irish? He said like they were the only race that was impervious to psychoanalysis. I'm down with that.
That's their D&D racial modifier.
Yeah.
Immunity to psychoanalytic abilities.
Yeah. That and displacement. Now,
that's a dominant gene that's spread anyway.
Yeah. Okay. And then with respect to this one, we got the exploitation. Let's move it on. Okay. So we got the important property relations for Weber. Okay. We got the intimate connection between the nature of property relations in capitalism and the problem employers face in eliciting high output from workers. Okay. This is probably getting to this idea of rationality. It's not theorized in terms of a general concept of exploitation, and it doesn't see the extraction of labor effort as a pivotal feature of class relations. Sorry, let's mute somebody. I think it's Derek. Does not see the extraction of labor efforts as a pivotal feature of class relations and as a central determinant of class conflict. Okay, and he treats the performance of labor. Treats the problem of labor performance as instances of technical inefficiencies between formal rationality and substantive rationality within capitalist relations. Okay, let's like there's a lot in there, but let's have a look at this. What does he mean here by substantive rationality versus formal rationality?
So this is the difference between instrumental and abstract reason, and I think for people to understand like some of what's going on here in Weberianism and maybe even like how it's come up in Marxism before, you may remember like this whole stuff about like substantive rationality and formal rationality and instrumentalized reason had all come up in Adorno and Horkheimer's Dialectic of Enlightenment, because they kind of take these categories like what we see in Weber and read them back on to Marx roughly, although while kind of critiquing Marx while also kind of still claiming to be Marxist. The technical inefficiencies part is something to grasp a little bit where opportunity cost and technical inefficiencies arise because of class motivation, where like you get the idea Weber thought that if you got these class tensions out of the way, capitalism might be more efficient and more productive. I mean, even though he was a socialist, so it's because the instrumentalized and formalized reason gets more and more broken apart. And yeah, Ezra, you want to step in here because I feel like I know what I'm talking about, but I'm actually having trouble articulating it.
This is part of why I brought up Foucault in the previous slide, but I think it is more useful to talk about the Frankfurt School. I think they're echoing Weber's fear about modernity and that the iron cage of rationality, where the rationality of means, and this is a kind of a simple way to put it, but the rationality of means consumes the rationality of ends. Weber has a typology of different types of reason, different things that are different ways that, humans reason. Like, moral reason, for instance. People, do have to like process things to see if they're right or not. But in a modern society, those other types of reason tend to get subsumed to instrumental reason. I remember hearing this as a theory, and then I was listening to, what at the time was one of the more interesting, like, sort of skeptic podcasts called Rationally Speaking. And they were speaking very plainly, like reason is this one thing, it's instrumental rationality, and that reason guts everything. And that other kinds of reason, they didn't call reason. And it really, I don't know. The example
it led to Massimo Pagliucci, that one of the guys on that podcast at the time, I guess, when you were listening to it. Was Massimo still on there?
Yes. Yeah.
Massimo began to distance himself from both the skeptics movement and ReasonquaReason, and got really into, and still is into, like weird stoic reasoning as a answer to the problems that he saw emerging from this instrumentalized rationality. Whereas Julia Galef, who stayed, still does the show. I think that show still, I think it still exists.
Yes. I just looked at it. I just looked at it recently.
Is Julia Galef still on there? I was actually Facebook friends with her way back in the day, but like,
really hosts that.
I say as if I knew her in any other capacity. Like, Julia also began first with this idea of ReasonquaReason, which dominated it at first, and later on began looking at different kinds of modal reasoning, as an analogy to modal logic. But what's funny is because they're so far down the analytic pipeline, they didn't know this work had already been done in sociology, and that it had emerged in the 18th and 19th century already as a problem. Like, it had already been something that people were aware of, and analytics are kind of actually reinventing the wheel here.
Yeah. Reason is more than one, distinct process. And I think I might have mentioned this earlier, but in a previous episode, but like rationality of means doesn't care what your ends are. If your ends are trying to annihilate the Jews, you can hire IBM to do cutting edge methods for how you're going to kill the Jews. Like, these are different, like, things that I would include in reason are not considered there.
Which is like the whole Frankfurt School point about fascism. Everyone's like, oh, it's irrational and based on mythemes and stuff. And while that's true, there's another sense that it's totally dependent on hyper instrumentalized rationality, and why they invented most of our modern weapons. So
it's the mythos of reason. It's how reason becomes ideology and can justify anything. Like, this is what most lay people know reasoning for, as bottom up rationalizing. This is where I think this is where a lot of just anti-intellectual sentiment comes from.
I would just like to read the brief definition that Eric Walton Wright gives of these terms. This is on page 28, footnote 21. So the distinction between instrumental rationality, the rationality of adopting the best means for given ends, and value rationality or substantive rationality, the rationality of choosing actions that are consistent with value commitments. So the problem of labor performance as instances of technical inefficiencies between formal rationality and substantive rationality within capitalist relations. I don't exactly see what the specifics of that are. I don't think Eric Olin Wright really gets into it this chapter so much. It's like, obviously I can understand that like those, like I could picture in my head, like, oh yeah, I could see how those might exist in capitalism, and it would be a fetter to production. But I don't know what the specifics are that he's really talking about here.
Well, the thing is and Weber, this actually emerges out of like discussions of Christian rationality and Christian civilization, and the replacement of those values, even the values of the Protestant work ethic, with just the value of efficiency qua efficiency itself, optimization, maximization. And one of the things the Frankfurt School throws at actually existing Marxism is that it doesn't get out of the problem of subsuming everything to instrumental rationality, and in doing so actually ends up creating new class structures and this, that, and the other, are,
right, and violates its imperatives.
Right.
Like, now, communism builds a class to destroy class and doesn't destroy class.
Right. Yeah. And this gets even more extreme in like the Chinese example, where you had like birth origins, caste systems that people even criticized within China itself, and then were purged in the 60s. So it's one. I mean, I'm laughing because of the morbid terribleness of a lot of it. But Weber's predicting like a lot of these kinds of are presaging, maybe not predicting, not the right word, but a lot of these kinds of arguments. But Kyle, it is vague. Like the substantive rationality being tied to given values is kind of it's going back to the whole Aristotelian telos thing, that rationality without telos pretty much is just efficiency, and then you can substitute emotively whatever the hell you want.
Sure. Yeah. No, I'm just talking about the labor performance problem that is being discussed here. That's the only thing that was like really unclear to me, because like, yeah, I mean, I've read the Frankfurt School.
Well, I think in Weber, he thinks a lot of these opportunity catchers of bureaucracy and stuff actually are highly inefficient, parasitic, and drain all classes, not just even the poor ones. Like, so
is this like opportunity capture as a form of rationalization of the economy gets in the way of economic aims, as like, these are the goods we want out of production?
Yes, that's part of it.
Okay, so it's like, yeah, like, just for example, like the bullshit jobs argument could, like, oh, these are like things that make sense at the micro level in terms of managerial imperatives in a capitalist system, but they produce a value irrational outcome.
Right.
Yeah.
And arguably even an economically inefficient outcome, even though each of them are instrumentally efficient in and of themselves. That's what they aim to be.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Yeah.
So like, what do we make of this idea then, that he's not like not putting like the point of production, like, and exploitation as like a major feature of class relations? That's kind of whack.
Well, as far as I understand, he was working off of marginalism. So production is a vestigial aspect of marginalist economics that has no real place in it, and that kind of figures then.
Yeah, and there's another thing he's trying to do too, is he doesn't actually believe in like modes of history, just like different life forms. So, and I admit the modes of history in Marxism kind of get muddled, because capitalism is the only thing that actually meets the true mode formality. I could go into that even in Marx proper, but Weber's trying to come up with a transhistorical theory about how this is happening. Marx is, saying, okay, we always produce stuff, but how we produce is radically different in different times and different places. And so you have to have a class analysis that is specific to. This is why the forces, like the forces of history argument, are the laws of motion argument so important to Marxism, is because like the class struggle is the law of motion, but the actual substance of the classes in which motivate them is different for each society and each mode of production. And properly speaking, for Marx, capitalism is the only fully developed, consistent mode of production. So
I would go to bat for this way of looking at things. I think without a grand historical theory of, surplus, extraction and distribution, like this is one of like the, I don't know, this is just one of the philosophical kind of things that grate on people about capitalism. Like I was talking to Sophia about being in a hospital where someone was very hungry and they didn't get food for like 5 hours, right? You're in a healthcare institution, and because of, bureaucratic this and that, someone who is hungry in a healthcare institution doesn't get like some Jell-O or some crackers. Like,
but unlike exploitation is not unique to capitalism though, Ezra. Like that's going to be the difference.
The Weberian big story, which of course Weber doesn't have a big story, but he totally does, is that modernity changes everything. Modernity transforms all of these human, status and, there's a chart on the coming up. Changes all of these categories of, what might be thought of as, class or hierarchy into rationalized forms. So, class itself for Weber is just one of these rationalized forms of something that existed before. As far as an elaborated class notion from Weber goes, it doesn't really exist before capitalism, which
actually ends up being not that different from Marxism.
It's not that different from Marxism. And even this concern with substantive rationality and formal rationality, I think Kyle, you describe these as centers. Right? Like, it should be obvious where this plugs in Marxism, in the forces and relations of production. You're trying to grow the productive forces, which can mean something more than just producing 1 million tons of steel or whatever. And you keep running into these situations where the way that property relations work and the laws that undergird that and the power structure around it, actually get in the way of productivity, get in the way of things like resource efficiency, which would, just on some simple, rational imperatives, and I don't think they're specifically capitalist, but whatever, you would want these things to happen. But the way capitalist reason works ends up feeding back onto it and fucking it up.
I think that I was going to say to that point. I don't know. I haven't seen the slide, so I don't know if this is a point that's going to come up later. But E.O. Wright includes a bit about Weber discussing the the agrarian reforms of Albion, something like that.
East Albion, yeah.
Yeah, East Albion labor reform or agrarian reforms. And I can't read that without thinking Elbonian. Just
the super Orientalists, fake country in Dilbert, who are to their armpits. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Who oppress left-handed people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
It's a great comic. Everybody should read it. Absolutely.
Oh God! Have you ever seen MRA Dilbert? Anyway.
Yeah.
But so there's
guy
come out as a big Trump guy. Did the Dilbert guy come out?
Oh yeah,
yeah. Scott Adams is a right-wing crank.
Scott Adams thinks he has the power of hypnosis.
Scott Adams is so reactionary that he thought MRAs were not anti-feminist enough. We're basically a bunch of crybabies, like men's rights activists who have sort of dropped off the radar, that were, a sort of thing for a while. He was like, these people are doing anti-feminism wrong. Like,
I mean, I agree with it that they were cryberries, but for completely different reasons than he did.
Right.
Oh.
He also launched a burrito line based on Dilbert, a vegan burrito line, which apparently gave people like intestinal problems. So, in the mid-90s. Anyway.
Yeah, reading Scott Adams gives me intestinal problems, but that's an entirely different story. So anyway, what was I going to say?
Gen X or reactionaries, move on.
Yes. No. So okay. So the point of that was that the way that Wright was describing how Weber was talking about these kinds of relations, qua rationality, was that as the agrarian reforms happened and the agrarian peasant was essentially proletarianized, like the fundamental relations between peasant and landlord remained more or less fixed, but the expression of it changed through the introduction of market forces, right? And it was this there's something that felt in the way that was described kind of like transhistorical about the way that Weber is putting forth an understanding of class relations, and that to I think it's your point, Derek, that it's the modernism and its rationality that becomes like the fundamental difference between the relations between various classes prior to the introduction of capitalism and afterwards. And it's the introduction of the necessity of instrumental reason, which then becomes like the driving factor behind what are sort of like pre-existing class relations. And I'm kind of wondering if I'm sort of like reading that right here in terms of what you were talking about.
I think so. I mean, I think you are. Well, the one thing I will say that get to what Tom was trying to get to, though, is that Weber's coming out of a left-wing tradition, and he would have seen himself as part of a left-wing tradition that had abandoned LTV, labor theory of value. It's one thing, Tom, that I think is quite interesting, that like, yes, Hume had like a subjectivist theory of value, but the people who really came up with marginalism were socialists. They were not capitalist. And which is hilarious because capitalists seize on to it because they're like, you found a way that we can defeat Marx finally.
I thought the marginalists came out of Burkean tradition.
It came out of, like, who are you talking specifically? I thought like the Godfather was Jevons. I didn't think he was a socialist.
He was. But he was a socialist, but he was definitely not a Marxian socialist.
Right.
Like the socialism that this comes out of is kind of more like Saint Simonian influenced. Has more of an ambiguous relationship to class than Marxism does.
So like a kind of like that's kind of like the British Fabian kind of tradition, is it?
No, but no, it's more like socialism as, okay, and I'm going to use this word and all the Americans are going to misunderstand me forever, but socialism as corporatism. So you achieve a classist society by all classes cooperating to the point there is no need for class anymore.
And I believe
the introduction of that society comes out of essentially like petty bourgeois paternalism.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jevons specifically, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, was very hostile to the working class. He kind of wanted just like how can we rationalize this system so these people are making such a fuss and causing so many problems can like find a place in the system and it's not going to be such a mess.
Basically, he was proto-Keynes because Keynes also thought the same thing.
Yeah. Let's just
but yes, they were nonetheless socialists, and that is important to remember. It's just they were not Marxists.
But the Austrians seize onto this to be like, ha, we can defeat you now, Marxist. Your socialist allies have given us the weapon to destroy you. I mean, and I know that sounds He-Man villainish, But that's kind of what actually happened.
No,
That's
Sounded
what
like Cartman, to be fair, actually.
Reactionaries do this all the time. Nice. I guess nice instrumental reason. We'll use it for different substantive ends. Like,
yep, same as it ever was. The socialists are our enemy.
But yeah, I just want to emphasize that point that production is not really a metaphor that makes any sense in a Walrasian. Yeah, sorry, I was thinking about Walra, not Jevons when I made that comment about working class. But in a Walrasian framework, it's not something that really makes any sense, and it's only included in the theory because it's such an appealing metaphor for how economic life works that you can't really get rid of it and have people buy into your theory. But it's not something that makes any theoretical sense because you're just talking about distribution of stuff in a field. You're not talking about production and its circulation.
Yeah, it's very similar to MMT's whole like we're going to tax the rich because we need to keep them less powerful, but not because we have any economic incentive to do so. These bad ideas don't. Yes, these ideas don't go away. But Weber just inherits all this.
They reformulate, you know. Okay.
And I would also say I definitely subscribe to the line of thinking that, you know, otherwise, I think Weber's project is largely framed by what Marx wrote. Like, even the Protestant ethic argument, I believe the skeleton of it is actually in Capital, Volume 1. It like, there's so much in Weber that seems to be either an extension or a response to Marx. Economic theory aside.
This is exactly what you'd expect because he's a revisionist SPD guy, right? So there's a wave of Marxists that are revising the sociology of Marx in a way that does away with the need for political revolution, with the understanding that they're still in favor of some sort of economic revolution. And if even eventually that becomes market socialism, and we could debate all day whether that counts. But ultimately,
and then it becomes reformism, and then it becomes not even that.
Right. This is a well-known, well-worn cycle. And Weber, for this reason, becomes the source material for creating an alternative to Marxist theories of class. And I think it's widely successful because it taps into the things that I'm going to call post-material so-called economies, economies that are based more on service labor and circulations of things produced elsewhere, or intangible forms of production, like, digitalization and that sort of thing.
Service work.
Yeah, like that sort of stuff is better addressed in a way by the Weberian framework. And it's developed as an alternative to Marx and, an attempt to undermine Marxist class analysis. But Weber has all of that in the background, and I think E.O. Wright is very convincing on this score that it's not theoretically incompatible at all.
Yeah, it's emphasis. A lot of it, it's just emphasis. But that emphasis makes a huge amount of difference because you can actually read.
It does.
You can read shit like that in like Keynes or stuff like that. If you want to find it,
Well, yeah, I mean, I think if you by the time you get to Keynesianism, you got a moribund capitalist class who's reaching out to various populist and socialist ideas to revitalize itself, and Weber's really convenient for that. I mean, this is also, studying the American left. You see this in the American left all the time. FDR steals a bunch of ideas from populists and socialist and actually fascist, and accidentally create something like proto-Keynesianism, but he's doing it ad hoc to kind of steal the momentum from these counter movements. Because at the time, as opposed to the 50s opposing these ideas, you actually revitalize your own dead ass ideas by stealing them selectively and undermining them partially.
Okay, let's move it on. We've done 2 slides, 45 minutes. This is going to be
we're making good progress.
We are making good progress. Now we got
the
a
moment
table.
I said Foucault, I knew we were in trouble.
That's it.
Well, nobody said dialectics, so we couldn't move on.
Good
That's
point.
what I was waiting for.
Overdetermination.
Yeah, there we go. Esri, you were talking about this table only a minute ago. Do you want to take us through it?
This is a lovely table. I think the one that I'm thinking of is further on, but this is what a table this is. Big fan of this table. So
table-kun.
Yeah, table-kun. The Japanese honorific.
Seriously, like I feel, Derek, do you feel old, like, with all this anime shit? Like, I have no idea what's going on. I'll tell you, like, I read anime in about 1984. I read Akira before you were fucking born, a lot of yous. But I've never read anything since, and I have no idea what the fuck is going on. All these people on the Discord server, all this, like, literally 25%. If it's not Puya talking about his god AI, it's fucking random anime shit.
Well, I know you don't know what the hell you're talking about, because you said you read anime. You read manga, you watch anime.
Manga, there you go. There you go. Fucking right. Fucking right. I don't get it. I
was just old enough to be around when Legend of the Overfiend was a thing. So I know just enough to follow these conversations, but I have if all these titles and stuff these youngsters mention, I don't know. Fucking millennial Zoomer cucks.
Somebody listening to this though is going to get the table-kun reference, and they're going to be laughing their ass off. And I made that for them.
Tiberius, you've woke me to that. Honestly, I do know what you mean.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I just got called Kaido-kun like on a daily basis in Japan because that was the proper suffix to use to my name. So it's not alien to me in any way. What does it mean? It's just a word you use to refer, like, it's a respectful word to use to a younger mask person in Japan.
Younger mask person.
Masculine.
Yeah, like masculine. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, yeah. I was thinking.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because in Korea they just don't have a respectful word for younger people because you wouldn't need it.
It's actually the Chinese character it's derived from is the character that refers to something analogous to gentleman. So it's not a like diminutive term really. It's more like, you know, just a nice thing to say to younger masked people.
If you don't know their profession.
Profession wouldn't really come into it
because Korea, all those
like if it was like a teacher thing, then you would still say sensei. But it's like someone you would use for someone who is equal to you in rank or lower to you in rank.
Okay, so
that's a nice bridge back here, isn't it? So spheres of social interaction.
Yeah.
This is the categories of the table. Sphere of social interaction, category that locates individuals within a distribution of power. And then attributes intrinsic. Attributes intrinsic to categories of the distribution of power. So this isn't going to translate real well on a podcast. But basically, you have, like, for instance, the economic sphere of social interaction. The category that locates individuals within the distribution of power is class. It has objective properties, but here in the table, it doesn't have subjective identity and it doesn't have collective action as an intrinsic property. Mm-hmm. In the communal sphere of social interaction, you have a status group as a category that locates you in the division of power. which has objective properties, has subjective identity, but doesn't intrinsically have collective action. And then in the political sphere of social interaction, the party locates you within the distribution of power, has objective properties, subjective identity, and collective action as an intrinsic attribute.
You see, in Marx, this is very actually somewhat similar if you look at the class for itself and the class in itself distinction.
Yeah.
Which he brings up.
So give me an example here then for people listening for the status group. So we have like our class is just like, you are, say, a worker versus a capitalist or something. Your party, you are in a workers' party. But what is, say, a status group that doesn't have collective action? Give an example of that.
Your racial group, and the thing is, it's not that it can't have collective action, but collective action is not intrinsic to it. So you can be black and not participate in black collective action.
I think blue collar is analogous as well.
Yeah.
Or an Ivy League, you're an Ivy League student. Something, or you're part of the Ivy Leagues. Anything. It can be anything.
Pretty much all your intersectional identity categories actually belong in the communal status group thing for Weber, which is actually interesting because we can think of Weber being used, with stratification theory to like block out Marx, but you have to also block out a hell of a lot of Weber to use it the way we would use it.
But status group would cover those big intersectional, identities, right? Because subjective identity is an intrinsic part of that.
But also cover like religion. It would also cover.
Right, but it would also cover things that are like a little more like tangential to these more sort of foundational, identities. I'm using the term identities, but we're really talking about something, maybe a little deeper than that intrinsically has identity as part of it. But then it also just breaks down to very, like high school cliques or something. like this is a very
like, were you a concept. Drama kid?
This is an extremely flexible concept that rhymes a lot with people's experience. This is why I think this framework is really valuable. It's because it doesn't just happen to my preferred world of abstract underlying mechanisms, but it resonates with how people experience different forms of discrimination or what have you in a way that is relational. It's not purely individualizing. This is a big step forward in interpreting the world as we know it. Like, I don't think this should be dismissed as an anti-Marxist way of looking at things.
No, right. I think it's just another way of saying a similar thing. The so just to clear up here, like, is anybody on the panel? Was anybody on the panel a drama kid? Can we just clear that up? Derek, you were actual drama kid. What does that mean? Like, does that mean like you did plays in school?
I was not an actor. I was a crew member. I was surprising to no one that knows me and knows drama. I was a stage manager. So I was basically a professional bully. So
that's not
we
really
hated you.
Utilizing your best qualities, Derek. And Tiberius, what were you doing?
We used to have interclick wars with the theater tech kids.
Theater tech kids, fuck's sake! Right? Okay.
You were a goddamn actor.
Hell yes, I was.
Scum.
Of course, Tiberius was. I mean, really.
And so the communal sphere of interaction and status groups within it can go down like fairly, fairly micro identities, and this is where a lot of
talking about
subcultural headbutting. This is actually a split within a subcultural, micro fucking subcultural after school activity. We're still talking
between
about.
The theater kids and the theater tech kids, like there was maybe 26 or 27 of us in total. So
yeah. It's interesting, actually, though, to think about the political action sphere and the communal action sphere, because this, I think, is where things are more muddled now. If you ask yourself what defines the political action sphere, other than the most vague sense of party, and the only thing that separates it from a communal action sphere is whether or not it can act as collective action. So this actually gets to something interesting we talk about in Marxism all the time. All sectarian groups are not political by this schema.
Yeah,
they're not political. They're communal because they do not have in the inherent size to take meaningful collective action relative to everything else.
Yeah, and they don't even like. I think it's even more than just size. I don't think they even have the goddamn intent.
Well, yeah, there's that too. But
the thing I actually find most questionable about this typology is that political parties intrinsically have collective action.
Yeah.
Like, I know what they mean because, you know, you in theory, the Democrats could get everyone to, you know, have them vote to raise the minimum wage, but that's not actually what they're going to do.
Well, yeah, but are they an actual party?
It's a certain kind of view of modern political rationality that I think sort of like suffers from the horizon of the time in which it was created, and like is maybe not that exhaustive in its description of what political parties do.
Right.
It's like, it's very much like this idea of, oh, you have the SPD, and that's the Workers' Party, and it collectively represents the workers' interests in a real actionable way, versus the bourgeois party, which is opposed to them. And there's a kind of logic and reason to that, which is somewhat alien to the sort of like mealy-mouthed, waffling, directionless view of party politics that is much more common today.
And well, frankly, it's much more common throughout history, to be honest. Like,
yeah, fair.
Mass politics is actually like mass politics in the way we
Exception.
saw them is actually an exception. Yeah,
Yeah.
So it's interesting that, like, I mean, and yes, there is a sense in which law enacted is a collective action, but then that means the category that locates individuals in the distribution of power is not the party; it is the legal apparatus. And I don't know if that's true. Then, like, a whole lot of assumptions about like part of the way politics works gets dashed by this. And I also want to point out that, like, in the American system, we've had mass politics, but it's never actually overlapped with our binary party system, like, ever concretely.
Like,
ever.
I'm going to say something controversial here. Like, is that kind of actual mass politics? To me, it seems like it's something that is only true in pre-revolutionary to revolutionary times and post-war times. What do people think about that?
I think the civil rights movement was actual mass politics.
Yeah, I can't block that.
That was pre-revolutionary, I think, and the revolution just got crushed before it even happened.
Yeah, like it's something kind of, yeah, maybe like socially revolutionary. You know what I mean? As opposed to maybe, I don't know if I'm being coherent there, but like if I think about Irish history, it's like politics was alive and thrashing like just prior to the War of Independence, and it quickly metastasized into like kind of, you know, forms there afterwards, and it's been really essentially stuck in that formation for 100 years. It's kind of, it's fraying now with Sinn Féin, but like if you look up north in Northern Ireland, the political powers out there have literally come out of war. If you look to like in American politics, the parties come from what are the origins of their parties? Like
the current two parties come from the Civil War.
You know what I mean?
Prior to that, One is the party of the yeoman proto bourgeois, and the other didn't exist yet. So I guess you could see the Whigs as the analogous to the Republicans, but like the Whigs were not actually even a party.
Like if you look at German politics today, you still have the fucking the carcass of the SPD, you know, like still hanging around 100 years after its, you know, actually lively period.
Hell, you have the carcass of Die Linke, which is like.
What is Die Linke from? Die Linke is.
It's from the
Eastern Bloc.
Yeah,
okay,
it's from
okay,
the Communist Party in Eastern Germany.
Yeah, it's sort of a coalition.
Combining with some elements of the extra parliamentary sort of left in West Germany.
Yeah, I guess the thing I would say is that broadly speaking, there is a sort of Democratic Republican Party, so-called, that lasts. Like it's a bit of projecting onto the past, but it is, that is one of the oldest like political institutions there is. The more or less the predecessor to the modern day Democratic Party.
Yes, it's the oldest member-based political party on the planet.
What about the Tory Party? The Tory Party.
Tory Party's not formally. It's informally older, but it's not formally older.
Right.
And there's a lot of controversy about all this. It's actually, I went through a Pop the Left where I spelled out the different theories of political parties. And the other thing was that the Tory Party was a party amongst parliamentarians only. It wasn't a party with where voters identified with it.
Right. The SPD is pretty much the prototypical like mass party.
Yeah, it is considered the oldest mass party by most people.
And weren't there like two separate Tory parties before they became like a proper party?
There was it the Whigs and the in English history, was it not the Whigs and the Tories, and then it became the Tories and the Liberals?
Right. The Whigs became the Liberals, unlike in America where the Whigs became the Republicans. Although to be fair, the Republicans in early American history were the Liberals. So the Democrats have managed to survive by not believing in anything ever.
Yeah.
So let's have that's actually your best strategy as a political entity to survive over the ages, is to have literally no core.
Pure instrumental reason.
Yeah. No, this is exactly right. That whatever you think you're about, who cares? Let's just keep this beast rolling.
Yeah, they're doing a good job for now. So this is quite party oriented. Like, where does anarchism and some of the ultra left stuff sit on the top of this?
For Weber, they don't matter.
I would say communal and economic. Do they intrinsically have collective action? No, but they can. Right? It's not an intrinsic dimension of the category. But if it did gain a collective action capacity, that's pretty much it.
This is another place where it gets weird, because like if churches, for example, take collective action, they're a communal status group. Weber would not make them a political group. They would remain a communal status group. Whereas if anarchists became like a collective actor, they would become a political, like that. That's actually an unclear mechanism in Weber.
But this ties exactly into debates around, is anarchist organizing meaningfully different than political organizing? Because once they start developing collective action potentials, they do end up either paralleling party structures or formally kind of announcing them. Like this.
So like the union becomes a party, is it?
Yeah. I mean, something like that. And I think that this points to a real, I don't know. I don't think this is just a quirk of the typology. It points to a real kind of paradox and, two intuitions clashing that, you deal with when you're trying to do something like politics against politics or whatever.
So this is like if we got really, I'm going to make an analogy to science for nerds. This is like how a species is like supposed to have a defined criterion, but it really doesn't. And sometimes some species are really subspecies, or maybe they're not species at all. And then because they can interbreed, although they're not supposed to, but then they can. So all these taxonomies are inherently on liminal cases more fluid than, and I honestly think even in Marx that's true, even though I think it's a little bit more objective.
It's true about taxonomies. Like the real world doesn't necessarily.
What's the objective property of status groups though? Like I was actually thinking about that. Like that they exist at all? Like because class like if you break down status groups under modern sociology, you have the difference between identification and classification. So what you see yourself as and what you are categorized as or classified as. Class being short for classification, right? But also that's specifically economic. Whereas like, for example, Esri and I are both of some mild Hebrew descent. Esri's got a lot more than me. My identification with probably Hebrew origins is actually probably stronger than Esri's. But my classification, even by other Jews, would be weaker to non-existent because my heritage claims are by blood right are much thinner.
So are you Derek saying then that you're a weak ass Jew? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I am a weak ass Jew.
Only by blood.
But if I took the socially relevant categorization and made it Germans, my ass gets thrown in the camp too, because it's
for sure.
This is going to feel a little strange, but I think that social property is the objective property being talked about.
Okay,
it's not necessarily a material property.
Well, and to that point, my brother and I have a long running joke that we're both white until we show the cop our ID cards, because our dad is from Punjab, and so we have Punjabi names, and so as soon as the cop sees non-white name, or as soon as some well-meaning liberal goes, "Oh, but no, where are you actually from?" Like that's when you stop being white.
Yeah. Look, let me just say, Derek, if I was in Germany at the wrong time with my red hair and curls, I would have been fucking in. They would have just chucked me in the fucking camps too.
Yeah,
just to be sure.
You would have gotten chucked in the camps because you can't keep your fucking mouth shut.
As I was about to say, you're a communist and you're Irish, and you're Irish. And you're Irish.
Yeah.
The reason that you would have been thrown into the camps, knowing what I know about you, Tom, is that your wife is black.
Yeah, that's another. Yeah, that'll also do it.
Yeah, that'll do it. Yeah. She's not my wife though. We're living in sin. Let's get that straight.
My bad.
Oh, you would have been thrown in the camps for that too. So you got it 5 times.
Woo! The Pentagon
can't touch my record.
No, you got Roma. Oh, you got everything. You got
you get all the symbols on the uniform.
It's like merit badges.
Seriously, you'd be like a NASCAR driver. Fucking hell.
Hell yeah.
Meanwhile, I'd be able to get into the party until the night of long knives, when they would summarily execute me for not being fascist enough.
Yeah. Tiberius. Now, let's move it on. Was there something else here? Oh dear. I think we're done with this one. Okay. Let's get into it. Weber's concept of class. Okay. Right. God damn it. There's a lot of... What am I doing here? Okay. Weber's concept of class. Next slide. Okay, so class is defined within the sphere of economic interaction and involves no necessary subjective identity or collective action. So here he's talking, it's more about your economic interaction, or is he talking about your production relation?
It's economic interaction. So it's relational, like in Marxism, but it is not as directly tied to and I'm going to use the circuit of production, because like service workers, even in Marx are, even though they don't make commodities, they're still working class because they're in the circuit of production and those exploited. But economic interactions also for Weber can be both demand side and supply side. So that's different than in Marxism. Marxism doesn't make that distinction. Like the distinction between demand and supply isn't a thing in Marx, and whereas it is in Weberian notions, because basically the revisionist liberalization of those categories. But it is interesting because like class for Weber is not like I can't subjectively just say I identify as working class. Everyone would just laugh at you. Like, so.
Oh dear.
Yeah, like the British understanding of working class as a collective identity is not what Weber is talking about here.
Okay. Next up, status groups are defined within the sphere of communal interaction, or what Weber calls the social order. So this is what we just kind of discussed.
In Marxist terms, this would be what like we would call this 90% of the quote superstructure order or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, is that how like vulgar Marxists would classify this? Okay.
I mean, vulgar. Yeah. Like.
Yeah, very rude Marxist. They imply some level of identity in the sense of some recognized. Let me just read this again. They imply some level of identity in the sense of some recognized positive or negative social estimation of honor. That's an interesting way of talking about the status group, because that's a little bit different than what we were saying earlier.
I think this is mostly what we were saying earlier.
The term honor may need some revision in the current context to mean something more like regard, because I think honor is not really a concept that has a whole lot of currency in many social contexts that we live in today.
To all of us.
Certainly not within the Emancipation Network.
This like you sir have insulted my honor kind of idea is a little it's peculiar to some cultures, but generally not widely held as the most important thing these days.
Well, the way Wright translates this is more helpful on the previous slide, where it's just like, I don't know, if you think about like, race, for instance, like some races are, honor is a pretty weird way to put it, but, are more like regarded within the society, and others are more kind of looked at with the side eye, and, one is to be suspicious of that. This is what Wright interprets Weber meaning by honor.
Okay. So,
well, I kind of wanted to bring up the blue collar thing again, because I've been thinking about Joe the plumber recently.
Love him. Great guy.
I've been thinking about Larry the Cable Guy recently. So it's kind of the same deal.
Well, no, I think Joe the plumber is kind of interesting because he was brought out to be like this representative of like the working class everyman kind of thing, and he definitely had that kind of like early 20th century kind of cultural aesthetic of someone who goes to work in a factory kind of thing. But the dude owned a plumbing company. He was a contractor. He was petty bourgeois. He was not working class. And so there's like, I keep trying to wrap my head around the way that you would sort of think about that in this kind of Weberian sense as it is being applied here or presented here by E.O. Wright, right? Because there is a kind of a communal sort of status thing going on with certain signifiers and ways of ways of acting and presenting oneself, and certain kinds of regard or honor, whatever the word is going to be used. But there's also an economic miscategorization happening here that is attached to it.
Yeah, often you have a sort of runaway effect where something, an aesthetic that may have been formed during an economic actor's, assumption of identity and collective action, right? The collective action melts away. The identity remains, becomes a sort of drifting signifier. And for a lot of the workers' movements, this signifier is really wrapped up with nationalist ideology and identity. So, like, in America, it's especially, it's like especially reactionary in a way that is more disguised in Western Europe or anywhere that had, like, social democracy or something, with the exception of some, like, settler societies like Israel and Australia, for instance. But yeah, I digress.
Is there a problem, like, again, getting to what Tiberius is saying there with respect to the title we looked at the last time, and like, kind of there's, I don't know what I'm trying to say is like that, like, it's not a distinction. Like, this table, you can be in multiple of these zones in the one time, and a status group can actually go against the economic class group. That it's not a very good way of, it's a way of teasing them out, but it's not sufficient.
Right, because they seem extremely fungible categories.
Yeah, and you can be, like, for example, like, he would be the plumber guy. You could say communally he would be in the working class, and you could say economically he's not, and you could say politically he's in another one.
Yeah, well, this is the fate of a lot of class identities. They get decoupled from collective action,
or even social relations.
Yeah, even objective social relations.
Yeah, that's fair.
I mean, that's like, blue collar, but I own my own business.
Yeah.
But I would say another thing that's interestingly fungible about all this in ways that problematize it a little bit. We have the collective action problem. We have the cultural identity problem. We have the infinite multiplicity of one of the categories, but not the other two. And we also have the problem, as we said, that, like, I don't know that outside of the realm of law, which I guess is collective action necessarily, sort of, kind of, because we all kind of have to agree to it for it to be enforceable, sort of.
Except when the Supreme Court decides to do something. Like,
but, like, if we all really disagree with the Supreme Court, we could, I don't know, blow it up. Like,
I don't know. I think there's a lot of good academic studies out there that have shown that the Supreme Court is essentially tailing society.
Yeah. If you need any Semtex lads, just give us a shout anyway.
Gotcha.
We're on some watch list now. But
Hockey our lot.
In terms of class status group, they may become conscious of sharing common identity, and then they can become a party when they organize on the basis of identity. So that's interestingly, it could be the class for itself or the status group for itself. And also then, like, you could have black interest, in alignment or against working class interest, etc. So it's nothing here that doesn't seem true. It just seems so fungible that it's not particularly predictive.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that Weber would follow the line that the status group for itself as a political actor would gradually give way to the class for itself as a more rational form of politics, right? Like, this is kind of goes with Weber's line of thinking of where society is going. That these values are going to become less and less important, and you're just going to get something closer to economic rationality being the main political motivator.
Right, except that we have seen this is where I think you're right about Weber, but the reason why this gets dropped from Debian analysis is because like it didn't happen that way.
Yeah, honestly, like when I was in Japan, I was talking to like Japanese former Marxists. Like a lot of what they expressed was like disappointment in these theories as predictive of where politics was going to go. Like they were kind of like, yeah, we never really got that rationalization that was expected to happen. It never really happened. And I feel like that's not just true of Japan. That's true of a hell of a lot of the world. It's just a particular sort of view of where history was going.
Yeah, whereas the post-material theory of society that predicted that once, you don't have to worry about a lot of the basics, a lot of your, identity would be about self-expression and, like that sort of thing rather than something that flows from economic rationality. That's a predictive theory that's panned out pretty well.
Yeah, but we're seeing the kind of destruction of that kind of class compromise. So we'll see the rise of class politics. Is kind of
you can also just be immiserated and fanatically devoted to expression of your identity through brands.
This is true, but I think this is where the Weberian Marxian sort of notions creep back in. That's not really a sustainable way to live for very long.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you got to have your minimum guaranteed minimum income so that you can continue consuming Disney products and be fanatically partisan about them.
Yeah, well, all I'm going to say is that Daffy Duck is a cunt.
I'm supposed to
cancel all the cartoons. All the cartoons. Just get them out of there.
Oh my god!
Hey, we already canceled Theodore Geisel, so
sorry, that was my misogynist. That was my misogyny for the day. Sorry.
I am supposed to yell at you now, Tom. I'll let Derek do it.
Dialectics.
It was a good one though. I like it. Okay, let's move it on. Okay, so we've kind of talked about this. Let's see. Let's just have a quick look before we go into a long spiel because we talked the shit out of that table. Daffy Duck. Is Daffy Duck even Disney?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, no, Donald Duck.
No, it's
Daffy
Donald Duck. Donald Duck.
Yeah. And see, that's why I said it, because I'm a Disney fan, you see. And Daffy is Warner Brothers. Fuck you, Warner Brothers. Okay. Nature of the mechanism. Okay, let's read this. The contrast between groups. Okay, we've done this already, haven't we? Nature of classes.
That's going to make for real good podcasting, Tom.
Why don't we just say this aloud? We can always cut it if it's redundant.
Yeah, the nature of the mechanism through which caste and status shape inequalities and material and symbolic conditions of people's lives. Class affects material well-being directly through the kinds of economic assets that bring to market exchanges. Static affects material well-being.
People bring to market exchanges.
Yeah. Indirectly through the way that categories of social honor underwrite various coercive mechanisms that go hand in hand with the monopolization of ideal and material goods and opportunities. And I would like to say that, like, this comes up on Marxism too. I mean, like, if you look at like with the wages of whiteness from W.E.B. Du Bois, who thought he was a pretty orthodox Marxist, it sounds pretty similar to this. But that's all I got to say about it. Feedback. If you're a vulgar Marxist, this is part of the, superstructure based feedback loop.
None of this matters. None of this matters, Derek. We don't have to la 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 la. We don't have to, true vulgar Marxist is a positive. We don't have to listen to this. This is all superstructural nonsense. This is just the things that people care about that affect them spiritually, and there's a whole underlying class form underneath that they're in the cave about. And
so,
we, the Marxists,
yeah,
will show them the truth.
We, the Chapo Marxists, will show them the truth, except when we're black-pilled and get all into our identity again. And also, we're only going to insist on this one part of vulgar Marxism and not, like, I don't know, the impossibility of national politics being a way of liberation in and of itself. Or
right.
I'm telling you,
and
you got to give it to them, though. You know, they tried so hard, they got so far, but in the end, it doesn't even matter.
Yeah.
I got somebody put me on to, there was a Patreon only episode of Chapo, and they sent me the MP3 on the PMC this week, and I swear to God, it was fucking brainworms. I never struggled. After 5 minutes, I wanted to hang myself. It was that bad. So I think I'm gonna play a 5-minute clip maybe in next week's show, and we can all give out for maybe 3 hours about it. But this is getting towards the whole fucking reason why we're doing this, man. This whole reading group, it made my eyes bleed and my ears. Why did my eyes bleed? I don't know, but it unfucking believable.
Are we starting YouTube beef?
The combination made your eyes bleed. I mean,
well, I mean, here's the thing. Here's the thing about that. I love how vulgar Marxists discover the PMC, whose objective criterion nobody can state.
They literally had no definition of what it was or any. There was nothing in it. Literally, all it was is I don't like these people. Literally, that's it. I don't like their aesthetic.
To whom I am also a member of the vague definition, which I have refused to enunciate.
There was a book put out recently called "Virtue Hoarders"
by Captain Lou, which I'm going to read.
That's her. That's who's on it.
Okay, right.
She is fucking unbelievably incoherent.
But hoarders, right? Like, again, tapping into this Weberian mechanism, but
without the coherence of categories.
Like, right. I don't know. I think a lot of Marxists would be unwilling to deal with this book, thinking about how these things, this is not maybe a class process in the way that Marxists normally talk about it. It's part of an expanded schema, and it's not really related to production in the way that they sort of I have trouble following their arguments, I think because they're incoherent.
You assume they have arguments.
Well,
they don't.
They intimate that they are, doing a classical Marxist analysis and then latch onto a category that has zip to do with production. Like, and I'm saying that none of these things matter, of course. It's just that that's not the Marxist theory of class. Wright is so good about this. Like he's so good about this. Let's talk about these things, but let's also clarify the Marxist theory of class.
As opposed to let's not care about these things, but we're going to insist on the Marxist theory of class until we lose an election and we get all butthurt about it because we never had a fucking class coalition in the first place. So we're going to just pretend that it's all the bad people who are weirdly of the same class we are, but they're not because we don't want to admit it.
I'll tell you what it is. It's the same, like the whole thing is a misdirection. Instead of having you having a dislike and a hatred for the owners and the bourgeoisie, they place the hatred onto the boss, and so they, onto your actual boss and a certain class, so certain, your direct, who you interact with in your day-to-day job type, and they direct away the attack line from fucking the people who own the country to the people who are the managers. Is it like, it reminds me of like
they do, but they're not even doing that. Like that at least has a pedigree that you can understand as a mode of production. But like a lot of times when they say PMC, like when Malcolm Swayze does it, he just means has a college degree.
Yeah, I know, it's so way more incoherent. Like, but it allows you, like, how does that operate? It's even worse because it allows you to basically, it's the bright kid in your class who was a bit of annoying and a nerd and studied hard and put his hand up every time the teacher asked a question. Like, it's Nixon as Marx.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say it's like the Kulak of our times, you know.
I mean, it's quite literally the people who outcompeted you from a similar position.
Yeah,
Correct.
because all these people are they're all college. All the people talk about this just are all college. I mean, Catherine Liu's like a UC Irvine media studies professor and poet.
I would not like to read her poetry. Give me a fucking break. Oh my God.
Don't trust poets. I can tell you. I know.
Yeah.
Just look at what happened in Yugoslavia. Don't trust poets.
Yeah.
I can tell you a story about a mustache seminary poet from Georgia that caused some real trouble in the 20th century.
Hey. I didn't do that much.
I don't know. I think a beard isn't a mustache, even if it includes one. But that's another logical argument. That's paraconsistent.
No, I was the only thing I was going to say is that a lot of the PMC argument is kind of I'm not racist, you're racist for calling me a racist kind of argument, except for like weird class non-understanding people.
Motivated. Refusal to understand class.
Right.
These
but it depends on the people who claim to be vulgar Marxists. That's what really bugs me about the whole thing. Like, and when I point out that, like, yes, some of the conditions that they are talking about do actually exist, everyone's like, well, you're just hiding the fact you're agreeing with them. I'm like, no, it's not a class category. It's actually a conspiracy theory, frankly. It is a conspiracy theory of all the nerds that you hated in high school who were probably some group you don't like, some status community you don't like, beating up on you now.
Yeah.
In parentheses. And that parentheses may or may not be Semitic.
Okay.
I mean, Marxism is now just a communal status group anyway, so let's move on.
Let's move it.
Always been.
Pointing gun at back of astronaut's head. Always has been. I think that's why Wright uses the word, the Marxist tradition. I really do. I think, and there's a deflation of Marxist identity that I think is helpful because it makes it a little less of a status group, if it's not such a virtue word, being like, we include you in the Marxist community. Like, if you relegate it to like a form of analysis that might be, completely fucking revisionist or reactionary, who gives a shit? Like,
I'm just picturing like a community welcoming committee of Marxists. We include you in the Marxist community. I could never imagine Marxists being that like sunny and welcoming about anything.
No, you've obviously never been courted by PSL.
Yeah, they do that actually.
Yeah, they do sort of love bomb you at first like that. That's true. But you normally see it with Marxists in excommunication. This person is not a Marxist, That's the main way that this operates, more so than the positive form.
Scotsmen are good at excluding people for arbitrary characteristics. Marxists got nothing on Scotsmen. I used to talk about no true Marxmen all the time. And it's funny because in an objective sense, they're not Marxist, but then it's like, but if I really hold to like the idea that Orthodox Marxism is the brainworm of Marx incarnate as the giant sandworm that rules us all, then the only Marx was non-existent because not even Marx was that consistent.
Yeah, not even Marx was that statist, like, and then the ones that aren't statist give up on everything Marx said about politics. So, like,
yeah, and also we should just say about the Scottish, they all just wish they were Irish anyway. Let's get that straight. Okay, it's like our redheaded stepchild, except we're all redheaded. Okay, let's keep going.
I think I know a certain general intellect unit member who might have something to say with that, or maybe not. Actually,
he's Irish.
They're Scottish. Question?
No, she just lives in Ireland.
He lives in Scotland.
Or sorry, in Scotland. Yes, in Scotland.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Shane is Irish. Yes.
Yeah.
Europeans all look the same to me.
He's one of the. Shane is over there. He's one of our like. What do they have? What do they call them in the? What did they call them in the Roman Empire? Where you had your like, your guy, your man in like, not your ambassador, but your
governor.
Yeah, it'd be basically like one of these like the Irish Empire governors of Eastern Lothian or something. Right, let's keep going. Sources in power. So we're getting on to the next table that we were talking about earlier. We'll do this table and the associated slides for it, and then we'll give it a rest for tonight. I'm past my prime brain power session. Here we go. Okay, so sources of power in Weber's work. So he says there are three sources of power the individual uses to accomplish their goals. 1, social honor. 2, material resources. And 3, authority. And they have rationalized and non-rationalized forms. So let's have a look at this absolute banger of a table here. Who wants to take this table? Yeah. Why don't you take it then, Esri, if you're...
I mean, 2 tables in one day? Jeez. Sure nobody else wants this one?
I'll take it.
Do it.
Okay. So, class location in Weber's analysis of rationalization. So this table has 2 axes, of course. The x-axis describes the degree of rationalization of social relations. So the further, like on the left is the more rational, and on the right is the less rational. And then the sources of social power is on the y-axis, and these are the ones that Tom just described. These are social honor, material conditions of life, or authority. Okay, so if you have honor and you are in a non-rationalized social relation, you you are in an ascriptive status group, which is a sort of catch-all term for like, feudal stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Like, oh, you're the Duke of such and such, or you're the Archbishop of so-and-so, or you're from this family, or you're,
you're the Mamluk.
You're next in line to inherit the guild ownership title, or whatever. Yeah.
You're the Mamluk Janissary sub-commander of blah, like just to get out of European examples.
Yeah. I was just thinking from Weber's perspective, but yes, absolutely, you're right. Yes, this applies universally.
Fails on boat dealership nephew.
No, that's a rationalized social relation.
Highly rationalized.
So, regarding fail sons, if you are in a rationalized social relation and your source of power is social honor, you should derive that from meritocratic prestige and not being a fail son of a used boat dealership owner. In a rational society, you should be in that position of honor on merit. You should have the Order of Canada or whatever the hell you want to say. Right?
So you're saying the Chet is a rationalized social relation of social honor.
The what?
To Chet.
Yeah. Like
sorry. Podcast crossover.
Yes.
What? Explain.
Okay.
Explain to Father Tom.
So
watch Jumpsuit Utopia.
Yeah, this is a
in Star Trek. In Star Trek Discovery, there's the Orion guy that runs the slave yard, basically, whose aunt runs the whole Orion cartel. And Sophia nicknamed him to Chet because he just seems like the guy who failed up.
Yes, he's the fail son slaver boss. So obviously the Orion Syndicate didn't get the memo from Weber. about one, slavery being inefficient and socially degenerative, and two, about the need for meritocracy in a rationalized society driven by capitalism.
Although he doesn't really like meritocracy, but anyway.
Yeah.
I think the way this conflicts with our intuitions is very important.
Okay, let's keep it moving here. So, if you're looking at the material conditions of life as a source of social power, and you're in a non-rationalized society, you are in ascriptively based consumption groups.
Now that's interesting that it's consumption groups and not production groups.
Yes. Makes more sense from a marginalist perspective to talk about consumption groups. And this is talking about, say, the aristocracy and their consumption of luxury goods. Or it's talking about, say, the way in which the social product would be distributed according to some feudal organization of distribution, like where, you're a peasant on this land, so you're going to produce roughly this much and you're going to get roughly this much just based on custom.
But it's interesting because caste doesn't even work that way. I was just thinking about that. I'm like, even the classic example of caste systems, they're not based on production groups. They're based on profession, which is a production group, not a consumption group, arguably.
Yeah, so you would, in terms of consumption groups, to look at a pure example, I guess you would have to say I'm a citizen of Canada and therefore I'm entitled to public health care. That is a scriptively based consumption group.
So citizenship consumption groups.
Yeah. And that would be non-rational.
But rational is capital and labor.
Yes. So rationalized class. Yeah. You basically you get compensated according to your class position in the capitalist system. Okay. That's final one. The source of social power is authority. If you are in a non-rational one, authority is assigned according to patrimonial administration. So the fail son whose daddy owns the used boat dealership, that would be patrimonial administration.
Hey, you a scratch on my back, I scratch on your back, capiche?
Yeah. Yes. It's like when Sonny becomes the leader of the Corleone family in Godfather, because his dad was the Don, and Sonny's not actually very good at what he does, but he's the older son, and so he gets this role, and then he gets himself killed. It's not rational.
So he must die.
Yeah, Sonny does die, in fact, because it's an irrational decision.
Pretty ignominiously at that.
Yep, crossfire in a highway toll booth. Then we have authority, which is delegated according to rationalized social relations. This is rational legal domination, or in other words, bureaucracy. So yeah, that's it's domination done according to rules with a sort of instrumental logic that guides them, as opposed to my daddy killed these people real good, so therefore I get to be the one in charge.
I must say I really hate the use of the word rationalization all the way through this chapter. It really bugs me.
You're not going to get on well with Weber.
True. That is his central concept. and I do think it gets to something about industrial class society. I would extend this to the USSR and its offshoots. What's unique about the USSR is it definitely checks two of those boxes in terms of rationalize, and then the third, for many periods, does not actually do capital and labor in the same way. So that's like, one possible objection. Another objection is that the way capitalism actually works has much more patrimonial administration and descriptive status groups than.
But rationalized here doesn't actually mean reasonable. It means like part of the thing is like the non-rationalized is just more honest about what's going on. That's implied in Weber. Like the the rationalized here, like rationalized means like, yes, it is given a veneer of reason, but it is subject to instrumentalized reason, but it is also a rationalized form of the prior. Like meritocratic prestige is actually not that different from ascriptive status, except now we are given an excuse where there wasn't an excuse before, or the excuse was God.
No, this is a vital point, actually, and I kind of stumbled upon this, but thank you for bringing this out, because this is a difference between Marx versus Weber arguments and, a Weber that would plug into historical materialism as Engels spins it.
Elaborate, please.
So if you think that meritocratic prestige and rational legal domination is a genuinely different form, for instance, of social relation instead of just like a new veneer, right? Then you can say there were no modes of production. Things worked completely differently before capitalism. And I know this sounds like a really stupid way to read Weber, but it's an elaboration of, the only mode of production is capitalism. Everything else is completely different. And you can't generalize about them the way that, not only just the way that, Engels or classical Marxists do, but you can't generalize about them. There's no meaningful generalizations to be made, with regards to surplus production, because what Marxists would call previous modes of production were not centered around production at all. Which is very likely not what Weber meant. And the version that, you're pointing to, Derek, with your, rightful correction, where I was taking this, because I'm kind of jousting with those other Weberians in my brain, is that rationalize is more or less talking about the ideological clothing that these forms of class adopt in capitalism. And
you have to just make the caveat that like the superstructure is actually influential on what these forms take, right? It's
right.
It is a rationalization in the pejorative sense or the psychological sense and an ideology, but it also does have a kind of shaping of what outcomes are.
No, that's right. Yeah. That's definitely right. Consider what rationalizing ascriptively based consumption groups into class, and Weber's sense of capitalism is the only, class society in that sense. What that does.
When you go from ascriptive status groups to meritocratic prestige, essentially what happens is that the education system launders your ascriptive status group for you in meritocratic clothing.
Right. Yeah. I was thinking like the Byzantine bureaucracy, where it was nominally meritocratic because you had to go through all of these stages of schooling, but the only people allowed into them are these certain ascriptive status groups. I think the
Confucian bureaucracy is the same way.
Confucian, yeah, that was what I was going to say, yeah.
Or as we say in Ireland, Protestants.
Yeah. Sorry. This also brings to mind.
I'm getting sectarian here. Just thought I'd throw that in.
Well, this also brings to mind like the way Republican government or, bourgeois administration under the Bolsheviks becomes, mustache daddy. Like, this is and I don't know, contemporary Russian nationalists will say, and like Putin, will say without hesitation, Stalin and, the Tsar are continuous, more or less. This is kind of what they're pointing to. This legal rational domination through bureaucracy, which, I mean, you can't say that didn't have a meaningful impact in how things went in the Soviet Union. Ends up being very important. But this, in a way, it's continuous with, like, an old-ass reactionary autocratic form of government. Down to the cult of masculinity around it.
Cool.
Cool.
Okay, last slide. Cool.
What do you mean by cool?
It's just a verbal ellipsis.
No, I was actually thinking about how, like, this is an interesting element of Weber that is kind of similar to Foucault, where I'm like, so you can take this as a critique of the failures of modernity to live up to its own, promises through its instrumentalization of reasons to hide essentially irrational commitments, or you could take it as like a way reactionaries do. It's just like, wasn't it more honest when we just didn't pretend that there was a good reason for this and we just did it?
But like, isn't there like within you have all this, the rationalization of the market and value form and all this stuff going on, but but you still have like loads of, like you still have the ownership being not a rationalized thing, but something that is passed on from your father or whatever. So like it has these kind of non-meritocratic stuff really fundamentally built into the system, It's like the case for the rationalization for capitalism is like, you can see what they're on about, like the reactionaries, because like it is kind of still there in capitalism right at the fucking foundation.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too when you think about like left bourgeois radicals, and I use bourgeois here important, like in the 18th, 19th century, one of their big things, like if you look at Henry George, which a lot of libertarians love for whatever reason, he wanted to abolish land property ownership, but not the produce of your later property ownership. And he also wanted to end all inheritance, that the tax on inheritance was 100% and it was redistributed. Now, he was a bourgeois radical, and it seems weird that we've normalized these old patriarchal forms in capital to the point where, like, that seems almost as radical as Marxism. Just be like, nope, no one inherits anything.
Yeah, right. It's the position against inheritance is generally like left liberal thing that people go on about, but it's I think it's taken as generally hopeless to try to abolish inheritance.
Which is funny because it's easy. One of the things that mechanistically would be super easy to do.
Yeah, mechanistically.
This is part of the argument. This is part of the argument
thing you've ever said, Derek. It's the most liberal thing you've ever goddamn said. Get off this show. Get off.
Well, no, this is part of what, when people defend the USSR as a classless society or something, they'll talk about the inability to, do like property inheritance, without really looking at the bureaucratic aspects of things. Or you could
actually inherit like your father's production thing. Actually, you couldn't, but not formally. But you did informally.
Not formally, right? Exactly.
But you did informally. Like,
give it long enough, and it would have been formalized.
You could inherit. You could inherit money, couldn't you? In the
Soviet Union? You could. You could inherit money, but you couldn't inherit. Which is funny because there are other countries in the USSR that no one pretends is not capitalist, where you actually can't technically inherit land. Like some of the Latin American states, like, yes, your land goes to your kid, but it's like a foreigner buying land there. It's technically on a 100-year lease. Like, it's not actually yours legally. But it was also funny because in like Mexico, I remember the teachers unions were radicalized, and they were radicalized about a lot of stuff I agreed with them about. But another thing they were mad about is you couldn't inherit your classroom down to your kid, because that was something that had been maintained in parts of Mexico. Is you could literally pass your classroom and thus your state pension down to your child.
That's the way I want it. That's the way we want it. I think we'll take a break.
Let's stop.
I think we'll stop there. Where did we get to? We got to we pretty much got.
We got that table.
Jesus Christ, this chapter is going to be a long one. Let me have a look here. How many pages have we done? We've done
like 15 or something.
We did 8 pages.
Oh Jesus!
This is the longest chapter in the whole book. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it is by far the longest chapter.
This is the hard book.
Still not that long, honestly.
No,
I read this. I read this at like 4 o'clock in the morning after pulling an all-nighter, and it was still like easy to read.
I don't know what you read.
This is also not the chapter that we're going to all fight to the death over. That's going to be the chapter in Labor Theory of Value, where like I think it's going to be E2 Esri.
You know what? Like, considering the state of value theory, when this guy was, working through economics, like, I'm fairly sympathetic to someone who like knows that stuff in and out, gave it up.
It just goes. Screw it! It's impossible.
Well, that tried to reconstruct it. This is not different than what a lot of value form people think. It's just better, like, extrapolated, and it's honest about abandoning value theory. Like, why wouldn't you want a better version of that theory instead? Like, pretending you care so much about value. No, you think Marx is wrong about it. Like, and you can say, like, please, like,
it's
tell
more
me
honest.
who you are.
It's
tell me who you
more
are.
Honest.
Yeah.
It's definitely more honest, but like whether it's right or not is another question. Let's head offline and say thanks to everybody in the chat for coming. We've had a good lot. We've had up to over 30. I think we had 33 or 4 concurrent views at the one time, which is not bad for such a esoteric topic that we are doing as usual.
And no dialectics. We had no dialectics in this session at all.
I cannot believe that. That is incredible. How did that happen?
It was only invoked to end a conversation. That was
yeah.
We used in its secondary informal definition as a word you say to end a conversation topic.
Yeah.
on that note, dialectics. Everybody, 1, 2, 3.
Dialectics.